Welcome back into the Lions247 Podcast. I am Tyler Donahue. We've got a lot to get to on this latest episode. It's episode number 1 of the week. We'll have another one for you a little bit later as Penn State making that transition almost from winter workouts to spring ball. They're in week 3 of 4 of those winter workouts, and the spring ball, of course, follows spring break. Before we get to a lot on what we experienced inside the Lash building on Saturday when media were invited in to witness a great event, we'll talk about Thon and the impact that the football program has on it and the impact that Thon has on the football program with Mark Brennan, with Daniel Gallen. A little bit later in this episode, we also have some observations and feedback from what we saw, what we heard in Penn State's football facilities. Had some conversations with Penn State veterans about how the team is progressing now 7 weeks removed from the Rose Bowl and less than a month away from the start of spring ball as the roster is transitioning. The staff has made some changes, and we've got some things to look at with Mark and Daniel, along with some Penn State basketball conversation. The Nittany Lions now riding a 2-game win streak. Jalen Pickett has gone bonkers trying to make this run, get back on the bubble, maybe to break through into the tournament. We'll talk about that a little bit later here on this show. But first things first, we bring in a recent Nittany Lion, a very familiar one for fans out there, Nick Tarburton, onto the Lions247 Podcast. Nick, great to see you. Good to hear from you, and thanks for giving us some time.
Yes, sir. Yeah, really appreciate you having me on.
Your recruiting class, that 2018 class, was the first recruiting class I covered ever in dealing with Penn State football. So you guys were really the first freshman class I saw make that transition. And now you're gone. PJ's gone. There's everyone's kind of moved on from the program. I guess, How do you feel? I mean, you're not in Lash right now. You're not going through the winter workouts early in the morning. I think there's probably some positives to take from that. But how does it, feel as it all kind of sinking in?
Yeah. First off, I'm just so blessed and thankful to be able to play, at a school like Penn State, for the past 5 years of my life. Been nothing short of amazing. Now taking this next step forward, it's also been great, taking these next, I think it's about 2 months or so, just full on hard training, just preparing for pro day. So, all that's been good.
We talked a little bit before we started recording. You're having some dialogue with guys who are still in the building, going through those winter workouts. They just hit the halfway point at the end of last week. They're over the hump in that regard. What do you remember about going through these mornings in February into early March before you get to spring ball?
Yeah, no, we, I think the best way to kind of put it is shared suffrage, basically. As brutal as that sounds, that's what it is. Winter workouts are meant to, break you down mentally, physically, and just kind of tear you apart. But, with your brothers by your side, it just kind of makes, yourself and also your team just so much stronger. And it's a tough process, but it's one that, every team needs to go through, and, I'm sure they're doing just fine up there.
And I want to talk about your journey, but just to get some perspective on where Penn State is right now. Devon Illies was talking to us on Saturday and was like, we all understand there needs to be new leaders. We lost 6 captains. We lost a bunch of guys like yourself who have been part of that backbone in the locker room. How important is this stretch to cultivate who those new leaders are, to kind of separate who's ready to lead from maybe who's not quite there yet?
Yeah, no doubt. This time of the year is extremely important to kind of, not only vocally kind of present as a leader, but also I think, just through your actions and, through your work ethic and your preparation, just throughout this process. I think, especially winter workouts, guys love to see, dudes being vocal, but, I'm a guy that I love to see, some guy that's just totally working, extremely hard, sticking out, in that aspect. So I think both aspects, throughout winter workouts, leaders are going to definitely rise.
Now, Nick, you spent 5 years, like you said, on this campus, and let's go all the way back to the beginning of that journey. You were one of those January enrollees. You guys had a very celebrated 2018 recruiting class, and you initially land in a linebackers room that at the time features Micah Parsons, who was playing defensive end at the high school level, and Jesse Luketa, who you ultimately ended up playing defensive end with at the end of your careers.
Yep.
Can you kind of look back at that early portion when you, Micah, and Jesse are in the linebacker room together? I don't know if you lasted longer than just 2 or 3 weeks before they made that move up to the defensive front, but talk us through that first semester with those guys.
Yeah, no, it was awesome, man. It was a new transition and in all of our lives, and we're kind of all taking it on together. I think that bond will always have just kind of going in early. Not a whole lot of guys can say that they've done that, but it was cool. It was special. You had guys in there like Cam Brown and Jan Johnson on top of some of the guys you just mentioned. Some older dudes that you just kind of really learn from and just kind of soak it all in at a young age like that. But it was special. I always remember it.
And you made that transition quickly to the defensive front. It was something that we discussed during your recruiting process, and I know you were open to the possibility, and you just wanted to be kind of an impact player, however you could at Penn State. What's it like when you show up? Because there's freshmen that we're eyeing up right now, guys who graduated early from high school, and we're wondering, are they going to stay at that position? What was that process like for you in that first semester?
Yeah, I think just being open, because I was recruited as both a linebacker and defensive end. Wasn't really sure, when or if it would happen, the transition. But I think the biggest thing and some advice that, I'll give and kind of what I've gone through is just, trust the coaches, trust Coach Franklin, trust your position coaches. They know what's best for you. They want to get you on the field as quick as possible too. And, just doing everything you can to, kind of make that transition easier is the most important thing.
So I just touched on the start of your career. We're going to get to a lot about the end of your career, being a starter in the Rose Bowl and all the success you had late. But in between that, there were some tough times for you, Nick. And often we weren't able to communicate with you. You weren't often on the field. Now that you've had a chance to kind of look back and reflect, I'd imagine, and I know you're always moving forward from those days, but what did you go through? I'm not asking for specifics about the injury, but mentally, physically, how much of a toll did that take before you were able to resurface and make an impact on the field with Penn State?
Yeah, no doubt. The first word that kind of comes to mind that I, kind of hold dearly to me is adversity. I love it. I think I've kind of been built up on that, just from a young age. I've gone through, not necessarily any injuries or from that aspect, but just life, just dealing with life and, kind of understanding how you're going to, deal with adversity when it knocks on your door. There's some guys that just kind of, cower and kind of hide. And then there's guys that, kind of, want to face it head on and attack it. And that's kind of the route that I took. Luckily for me, the injuries at hand were nothing, overly serious. I never had any, big time procedures and surgery. Like, it wasn't any of that. It was just more of, kind of just understanding my body, knowing how to really take care of my body, I guess, from that aspect. And just, I think working with, the strength staff, the trainers, and kind of formulating a plan for me. What became important for me was prehab, rehab, after, we're doing different stuff after practice, after games, just getting right. And I think just the timing aspect of, I needed my body to heal. And, and at Penn State, man, we're competing at that, top level every single day. And, me as a younger guy was like, man, I need to go. When at times, there was times when I needed to just relax, let my body recover, let it heal. But, luckily COVID, for me was a bit of a blessing because I was able to get that necessary recovery and, ultimately be able to play and, live out my dreams at Penn State.
Did you ever have serious doubts, not just maybe some thoughts, but ever like a stretch of serious doubt that you would be able to contribute consistently as a college football player?
Yeah, I would say, one night specifically kind of triggers, that question was, it was me and my parents kind of on a phone call. I remember, I'm hanging out at my house, man, and just kind of, having a rough day, having a rough go, and kind of, understanding, that, I'm in a tough spot right now. It's hard, kind of struggling going through it. And, with both sides, my parents were kind of giving me feedback and I was kind of taking it all in and understanding it. But, kind of like I said before, adversity is something that I kind of like, I just love to attack it, man. That's something that I'm, this is no sob story in any way. This is me just, facing adversity head on and just attacking it and, being better from it.
Now, if I recall correctly, you and your 2018 classmate, Juice Scruggs, spent some significant time together in the training room, watching your teammates go full force, trying to get there yourselves. What can you take us behind those days when Juice is working his way back from just a very violent auto accident? I'm not sure how many people grasp just how serious of a situation that was, to the point where he is a two-time starting center, a guy who's going to the NFL Combine and played more snaps than anyone on this football team the last couple seasons.
Yeah, no, it's crazy, man, to see where Juice went and kind of what he had to go through, man. It's special. He's a guy that I hold dearly to my heart. He's a brother of mine, and he's done just an unbelievable job. Just getting to where he is now, and it's so cool to see.
Now I think it was Juice, Brenton, you all let everybody know, which we appreciated, that you were going to be moving forward from the program after the Rose Bowl, but you did it before the game. And that's something that was a little outside the box. We talked to you about that in Pasadena, but I want to kind of bring it to our listeners. Why do you think it trended that way for this group of seniors? You knew your mind was made up on 2023, yet you stuck around, put in that month of work, and obviously had the opportunity to go out and play in one of the bigger football games each year. Yeah,
no doubt. The choice kind of came to me, more or less just the coaches kind of wondering where I was kind of going to go with this. This happened. I want to say there was probably 2 more games than the bowl game. And, going into it, I didn't want to kind of say either way, didn't want to lean either way, just because, I knew I had 3 more games with my brothers either way. And, I didn't want to let that choice kind of impact, the team or any, or my teammates or anything like that. But just, I think why it kind of played out how it did is, like, I knew going in kind of what my plan was. And at that point, I felt like it was necessary just to, kind of get it off my plate, get it off my chest before I go into this, the biggest game I've ever played in so far, to this day, just to kind of get that off my plate, but also to, kind of like you said, let, y'all know, but, let my teammates and my coaches know that, I'll be moving on after this game, but I'm going to give you, everything I got, for my last game.
Well, we appreciate it because we didn't have to ask you about it. We weren't pestering you guys about it. We could ask other questions. We could focus on football. So I think that's what, from my media perspective, we loved about it. But Nick, you guys went, you completed the task. You had a 14-point win over a very talented Utah squad, a top 10 matchup. And obviously it sets the stage for what's ahead for Penn State. But what was that night like? You knowing it's the last time in a Nittany Lions uniform, knowing that a lot of eyes in the college football universe are on Penn State versus Utah, and the way y'all delivered after a month of waiting for the moment and waiting for the chance.
Yeah, no doubt. That night was just special, and I think it just capped off a special season with a special group of guys that I was just honored to be around. Like I said, I keep going back to this, but every guy in that locker room, every coach, every staff member, I hold near and dear to my heart. Like it's everything to me. And to be able to kind of finish what we started in that way, is something I'm always, going to be forever grateful for. It was a special night. It was awesome.
It was the last game for PJ Mustipher as well. You guys went through a lot. He had his own recovery process. What did he mean to you? What did PJ mean to Penn State during his 5 years there?
Yeah, definitely. He's one of my best friends. I look at him as, kind of like a rock, man. He's a guy that's he's steady. He's always been there for me, from day one, from the first time I met him recruiting, he's always there. He's funny, man. He's, can always put a smile on your face. He's such a great guy, let alone, a great football player. He's also just so much more than that. And, PJ is he's awesome, man. He's one of my best friends, and, I can't say more about him. He's awesome.
I mentioned Devon earlier, and speaking with him last Saturday, he talked about it. It's a little strange not having PJ around, having that presence. But in that defensive line room, he seems like someone who can maybe take on some of that presence, has that kind of a personality. He played with PJ in high school. Can you kind of give us the lowdown, your sense of where this defensive line room is from a personality perspective, maybe some of those rising leaders? Because I'm assuming he's one of them. Are there any others?
Yeah, no, I think he comes to mind. I think a guy like Adisa Isaac comes to mind. Chop Robinson, Smith Vilbert, kind of that core right there, I think is pretty solid. And you got a lot of good young guys, man. I mean, this D line room is special. And I think they can do a lot of great things. I think leadership wise, I think they'll be solid. those guys I mentioned, but I think just that whole entire room in general, they have their head on straight. Coach Scott, Dion, they're doing great things there, and I'm excited for those boys.
We'll get the focus back on you in a second, but how about the scouting report on a couple of young guys? Because you mentioned them, Zane Durant, Denai Dennis Sutton, they both burned their red shirt, but because of the health you had on the defensive line, because of the bodies you had out there and the experience, they didn't have to have too much of a task. What do you think about the potential for year 2 for each of those guys?
Yeah, I think the sky's the limit. I think you've kind of seen what, both those guys can do. I think they're, both in their aspects, I think they're freakishly athletic, can do some pretty amazing things. And I think, they're smart dudes to begin with, because they wouldn't be playing, as a freshman, if they didn't know the plays and weren't, schematically correct all the time. But I think even another year under their belt with, all that similar just wording and, just technique and stuff like that, I think it's just going to, help them that much more and propel them into next year.
How fulfilling was the finish of your career? We already discussed those adverse moments and the way you attacked them, but 13 starts in 13 games. You split that starting role last year with Jesse Luketa, ultimately end up with a career high in tackles for loss and sacks in your final season. What did it mean to you to be able to finish on your own terms and standing upright and being productive?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's not about me, to be honest with you. It's a credit to, all my teammates and all my coaches that, trusted me and, let me to, kind of take that role. And I'm, just forever thankful for it. I'm a guy that's, going to work as hard as he possibly can each and every day. And I think that's a credit to that too. But, more than anything, I'm just so thankful to, be able to play aside the guys that I played aside and, be able to be coached by, the best in the nation. It was, the best 5 years of my life, and, I'm forever grateful for it.
Do you have a favorite moment that you'll forever savor that you feel like stands above the rest? Maybe it's the Rose Bowl, but if it's not, is there a definitive spot right now through your 5-year timeline at Penn State where that you feel like is going to stay with you above others?
I think definitely when that, when that clock kind of buzzed after that Rose Bowl, it was pretty special. I think, what better way to, kind of go out than, to win the Rose Bowl, my senior season and, with the guys that I did it with, and the coaches and the staff and everybody. It was a special season with a special group of people. But also just not only that, I also, would say, the times after the locker room, after the big wins, in the locker room with all those guys, and just being able to run out, in Beaver Stadium. I mean, there's nothing like running out with, 107, 110 plus thousand fans, screaming. It's a whirlwind of stuff that, that I, hold near and dear. And it was special, man. It was awesome.
Now, Nick, you were part of 5 different Penn State squads. I know every journey is unique. Some of those teams were knocking on the door of college football playoff contention. Some of those teams didn't match expectations. What do you feel about this 2023 group that's just really launching and what they may be able to accomplish?
Yeah, I think, again, I think the sky's the limit with these guys. I think we really made a case for ourselves last year, and now that's just going to propel these guys into, what they got going on this year. Without a doubt, they got the talent to do it. Without a doubt, they got the coaches to coach it. I think these guys can do everything and then some this year. And, I'm excited to kind of, see how everything shakes out for them.
And the follow-up question that everyone wants to know all the time is, well, what about the new quarterback? It feels like a lot is hinging on that situation. If it is Drew Aller, we understand that Bo Prabula is going to continue competing and there's going to be a battle there. But if Drew's the quarterback, can you tell us what you saw from him on the practice field? We got our glimpses. I think we saw him throw about 60 passes against opponents, but you saw him do a lot on the practice field. How much progression did he make from January enrollment to the end of Rose Bowl preparation?
Yeah, I think he made a lot, not only on the field, but I think, in other aspects, at least with us, I think he grew up a lot. I think he's, becoming that, vocal guy that, if you're not as a quarterback, you kind of got to be vocal in that aspect. But what I saw from him and, not that kind of on the outskirts, I could tell that, He's a great kid. I think he's really humble, which I think is extremely important, especially in this day and age with college football and all that's going on. I think staying humble and having a good base is important. I think that's something that he has, and I'm excited to see what he does. Man, he's a special player, and he's going to do great things.
Let's talk about your future. What has the last 7 weeks been like? What is the next couple of months like before the NFL draft takes place and before you ultimately get to land somewhere and go to work?
Yeah, no, it's you've kind of said it right there. It's pretty much just been all work, man. So right now I'm actually back home in Bucks County, Pennsylvania. I'm training at a facility kind of right outside Philadelphia, so I'm commuting there Monday to Friday. 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. Just, getting in there and working, man. And it's been awesome. Really happy with, where I'm at and how things are going. But yeah, just like you said, just continuing to, work really hard these next, I think I got about 3.5 weeks, 4 weeks up until pro day coming up here soon. So at Penn State. So, up until then, just working and then, kind of hoping I do great there and then, see where things fall, after this draft and everything.
Yeah, we're going to see you at Pro Day next month, and of course, several of your teammates are going to be there, but several of them will before then make the trip out to Indianapolis, compete in the scouting combine. Is that a situation where it's bittersweet to see their names on the list and your name not on the list?
No. I mean, obviously I'd love to be there with those guys, but those guys earned every right to be there, and I couldn't be more happy for those guys, and I'll be cheering them on hard when I think in the next week or so. So definitely.
How engaged are you with other members of this group, this upcoming draft class, as you guys get at the precipice of jumping into professional football?
Yeah. I'd say I'd like to be more. I think all of us are kind of just grinding hard. These next few weeks especially. But I've definitely been in contact with some of the guys, just touching base, catching up. You can only do so much just because the schedules we got are pretty crazy right now. But I can't wait to catch up with all these guys even more at pro day.
And wherever city you end up here for the next upcoming season, what are you going to bring there, and what's the next phase of your football life going to look like as you kind of lay that blueprint?
Yeah, I'm a football player. Wherever you need me, I'm going to be there. Whether that be defense, whether that be special teams, whatever you need. I'm going to give everything I got. I think I'm a guy with extreme work ethic. Who's going to just bust every single time, just work as extremely hard as possible. I think I'm also a good teammate. Someone that you're going to want in your locker room. Just a locker room builder, just going to be there for others, and just I'm just here to just give my all, and I'm so excited for this next step.
Nick, excited for you. It's been really fun following you the last 5-6 years and knowing what you went through, knowing how you came out the other side of it. I'm sure you're stronger for it, and appreciate your time coming on the podcast with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was awesome.
All right, take care, Nick. Let's shift gears over to our Lions247 colleagues now on the heels of a great interview there with Nick Tarburton, who we'll all be following closely at the next level of his football career. But Daniel Gallen and Mark Brennan hop in now. And fellas, you got a tough act to follow. I know you cut the last couple of minutes there. Just once again, one of our main conversation pieces early on with Nick was about how this team can develop something important in these couple months of winter workouts and before they actually get back on the practice field. And I wanted to start there with you because, Mark, we were back in the Lash building on Saturday. It was an opportunity to talk football, but more importantly, Thon was happening on campus. And when Thon is happening, as I've learned here in the last 5-6 years, it is such a part of the fabric of what Penn State is.
Yeah, especially when you have kids, right? I mean, you start. Sorry,
now
Daniel,
it's very different.
Yeah, I mean, it really hits home. And Penn State has been doing this Explorers program that they do. Oh boy, I mean, it goes back to the mid 2000s, and it's a really cool thing. And these football players, their lives are tough in terms of everything they have to do with schoolwork and the schedule. But the thing that they talk about every single year and is the perspective that it provides. That they're college football isn't the easiest life, but compared to what these kids go through and their families, it's not just the kids, it's the families. And, the other cool thing, and you guys are starting to see it now, is that you start to see some of the same families there year after year after year. Why is that important? Because those kids are still with us, who were there 15 years ago, and they come back a little bit older now. But I mean, that really kind of hits home through all the coaching changes and everything else that's gone on with the players kind of rolling over every 4 or 5 years or 3 years or 2 years or whatever it is now. To see that is pretty cool. And the other part of it is when you talk about leadership, those are the kind of you see the young guys getting involved with it. So not just the Thon Explorers, which is where the Thon families go through Lash Building and get a tour and get to see all the cool stuff, but then having the guys who just arrived participate in the athlete hour and go over there. And so that's their first public appearance, in uniform. And what is that telling you? Where are the priorities? The priorities are in the right place, even though we're not allowed to interview them, which is fine. I don't have an issue with that. To have them go over there and their first public appearance is with all these other Penn State athletes, and they're all intermingling, and then they're all dealing with these kids and their families. That's where you set foundations. That's program building stuff to be able to help at that level these kids and their families.
Faces were lit up. It was really cool to see. I know you can interview them, but there's a photo gallery of all these early enrolled freshmen. You can see a lot of them smiling. Anthony Donko stole the show, though, with his bit with the cheerleading group, by the way. But I just want to say it was the veterans of this group. Keandre Lambert had the shark painted on the side of his face, and he was telling me he's been waiting a long time for this day. These guys were in there that morning, grinding, working. We just heard from Nick Tarburton how difficult these winter workout days are, and it can feel like, the football season's forever away and you're going through the gauntlet. But Daniel, what did you kind of take away when you're walking around here? And we're usually in more of a high stakes situation, high pressure situation when reporters and players get together. It's after a big win, after a big loss, or leading up to one or the other. This was a different circumstance.
Definitely. I think it lets you see the maybe a little bit of a different side of some of these players. You see them maybe with, from our perspective, with their guard down a little bit, just interacting on more of a, person to person basis with these families and with these kids. And it's really cool to see. But, in talking to some of the guys after, when we had our chance to, they talked about how they look forward to doing this every year, and that, it's their chance to give back. It's their chance to, like I said, engage on that human to human level, with the community, and, kind of, reach out and give back to, these people who probably support them as fans. And so I think that it's something that they take really seriously. I think Devon Elise talked about how, you come in and, you have to make it a special day for these kids and for these families. And that's something that, these players really, really want to do. And I think it's something that they really succeed at doing based on what we were seeing around the Lash Building and what you see in the photo gallery and the videos from the athlete hour.
And we cover football, so obviously we're going to focus on the football team and their role, but Thon is a community-wide deal, and the result was a record-setting fundraising effort, over $15 million raised for Four Diamonds, all that money going to the critical research going toward pediatric cancer. And like Mark referenced, I've got a daughter who's 16 months now, so walking into that room on Saturday was definitely different than doing it before she showed up. So kudos to the players, the staff, and everybody involved there. But let's do our jobs now. Let's be football analysts and talk about what we observed and what we heard from that side of things. And Mark, we got a few team veterans, and Franklin alluded to this a couple weeks ago. They need to find new leadership. This is the time where you do it. I'm imagining the guys that they sent out to us, it's a good indication of where they stand. But they lost all 6 team captains from an 11-win squad.
Yeah, but the thing that I think was positive is that all those captains were still with the team at the end of the year, right? So even when things went sideways during that 3-game stretch and they dropped 2 games, you look around the country and you see what happens sometimes in those situations, and some teams begin to mail it in. So I think on the way out the door, that previous group left just set a great example, and no better example than the Rose Bowl, right? I mean, arguably to the team's two strongest, if not two of the handful of strongest leaders, were the MVPs in Sean Clifford and Tig. I mean, so for this group to be able to draw from them and see that, listen, you can overcome adversity. I go back to what I was saying at the beginning of last year, and we all knew it was going to happen. We knew at some point adversity was going to strike, and we probably guessed when it was going to strike. And, it didn't take a rocket scientist to figure out exactly when it would hit. But when it did hit, unlike the previous couple years, they didn't go south. And I think that spoke to the leadership. And I think the fact that all of the guys who are going to be looked at as leaders this year were able to learn from that. I think one of the real key differences, though, is that on offense especially, I think they're going to be fine leadership-wise, defensively. You look around that room from guys like Curtis Jacobs. You mentioned Devon Ellies. He's been a guy who's been kind of a behind-the-scenes leader, but just really involved. Kalen King. There are all sorts of leaders on that. Keaton Ellis is coming back for another year, so there's all sorts of leadership there. And I think over on offense, though, they're going to be fine on the offensive line. Olu Fashanu, we had an opportunity to talk to him for the first time, and you see where he's emerging as one of those players. Hunter Norzad's back, Sal Wormley. I'm sure I'm forgetting people. They have all these people, but I think when you look at the skill positions, to me, that's going to be the real key, and especially when you look at quarterback. And that's going to be, to me, the key during spring practice is not only having Drew Aller step up and solidify what already seems like a strong hold on the starting job, but to emerge as that leader, because that's a natural leadership position. So it would have been nice. I wish we would have had an opportunity to speak to him, but we did get an opportunity earlier to speak to him. So that was definitely cool. But hearing from all the players, they were saying all the right things. But we'll see. I mean, over on offense, to me, that's where it's going to be the biggest challenge. I did not get a chance to talk to Keandre. I know you went over there. I only talked to Olu, who, I mean, it seems like things are really lined up well with its offensive line to be as talented and as deep as they've been in a really long time. But again, the skill positions, I think, is where it's going to come into play.
Yeah, I'll address the wide receiver spot. Actually, first I'll touch on what you said about Drew Aller, because right before you guys hopped on, Nick Tarburton gave us a pretty good assessment about how Drew grew in year one, specifically from a vocal aspect. And that's what we heard more of from Devon Ellies just a couple days ago in this conversation, where he said he has no concerns at all. And then, of course, he's not going to say anything else to us when we have microphones in his face. But Drew is a guy who he was on this podcast 2 or 3 times before he enrolled on campus. I think people heard he can carry himself in a conversation, and he's getting better and better with that, with more training. But it's not just about giving high fives as the starting quarterback. I think a lot of people picture that. It's about pointing your finger and getting in somebody's face, maybe grabbing a face mask. And that's the one aspect that I know you could count on with Sean Clifford for a long time. That's his personality. That's a part of Drew Aller that we're still going to figure out. His teammates are figuring that out. The staff is. It's going to take us a little while longer until we see some things take place, until we see him take some pitfalls and then work his way out of it and work the offense out of it. But starting there and then getting over to Keandre Lambert-Smith, this guy is as motivated as they come on this roster right now. People around the team facility have noticed that he has been around, and he's been around a lot. Year 4 now for a guy who came in with Parker Washington. He's now gone. Jaden Dotton has left the program. Malik Mega was part of that class. He hasn't worked out that well at receiver to this point, more of a special teams guy. So there's been a gap between Keandre Lambert-Smith and kind of the other wide receivers who we've been talking about. He's the old head in the room. If you're looking for new team captains, he certainly wanted to maybe circle on that list of possibilities. But something he referenced himself is he's trying to hold himself to a higher accountability and demand more consistency from himself from a mental perspective. And we talked about his mentality with Taylor Stubblefield over the years. Keandre has always been transparent about having maybe some issues carrying it day to day and not being able to close the door on some moments. He feels like he's in a really good spot there. You look at how he finished the 2022 season. Those last 2 games, he essentially doubled his season stats on the year as a junior, and really was able to salvage something big out of the season. His first 100-yard performance in the Rose Bowl. And I had a story up this week, Daniel and Mark, where basically just went through about he's looking to take the next step as a receiver, and he does not mind the fact that Malik McClain is entering the situation. He does not mind the fact that Dante Cephas is entering the situation. He is as competitive as they come. It was something I loved about him as a recruit. I think he was a guy that people wondered if he put an eye toward the transfer portal maybe at some point during his career. Folks, he has started almost 30 games here for Penn State, and I know he hasn't had that breakout stretch yet, but I'm telling you, he when you start to put the pieces together, Daniel, and look at what this wide receiver group could be, there is a lot to like about what's in place for him, and also how he fits in as being a vocal guy for a new coach in Marcus Hagans. And those two have history. He recruited him on behalf of Virginia. He hosted him down there at that campus. So I think it's important when we're talking about all the young talent there, DeAndre can talk. And I think he can put some guys in their place when he needs to. And that's going to be advantageous for a first-year coach with the staff.
I think when you look at the wide receiver room behind Keandre with what Penn State was bringing back, there's a significant drop-off. Keandre's stats this year weren't necessarily, I think he admitted it in November, that this wasn't really what he expected in year three. But you go down and there's just not a lot of experience and not a lot of proven production that's returning. Getting Malik McClain and Dante Cephas is a good addition, but I think Keandre Lambert-Smith is in a position to really be sort of the glue of that room moving forward. And that's a big spot to be in, especially when you're going to have a first-year starting quarterback. There's going to be really high expectations up and down this roster. And so I think how Keandre Lambert-Smith steps into that role is going to be really interesting to watch. And I think he might be someone that is good to look to when you're trying to take the temperature of the team and where they're at, because I think that we've seen that he wears things pretty emotionally, pretty outwardly. And the physical tools have always been there. And we saw it with some of the big plays he made in those last 2 games of the year. But that mental side is going to be really important, and what he's able to do as a leader stepping into that role. He's watched a lot of good receivers come through and how they've done things. Jahan Dotson, working alongside Parker, seeing Mitchell Tinsley last year. But this is a really big opportunity for him to really step up, figure out how to lead this room, and really set the tone.
And no one else in this 2023 receiver unit owns 20 receptions in a Nittany Lions uniform. Guys have caught passes for other teams, but in terms of what they brought back on this roster, it's, again, a significant gap between Keandre and the others. I think everyone wants to peg Harrison Wallace in that. I think he has 17 career catches to this point. It's easy to forget that fact, but receiver room in flux. We'll get to that more. The offensive line room, and Mark just mentioned it, is in a really good spot because you have trouble remembering how many names of guys who have started all these games. And Olu was there, and obviously we swarmed to him. And Mark, you were there, and you've already addressed a little bit. So I'm going to go back to Daniel because you wrote the story. What stood out to you about Olu? He seems like a man on a mission. Clearly, he has millions of dollars to make as the potential number 1 offensive lineman in his class. But, boy, if it comes together for him as a leader and a player, it's going to be a huge boost for the 2023 Penn State team.
I think that by the time this offseason is over, I think people are probably going to be sick of us talking about leadership. But that's where a lot of the conversations really went back to on Saturday, especially in that setting. And I thought that talking to Olu was really interesting in that respect, where he said that there were times in the past where he wished that he would have stepped up and told people, in his words, to stop messing around, to go to people in times like that, and he didn't. And that's something that he wants to do differently this year. I think that, in terms of how he's played and how he's worked and how he's gotten to this point, you kind of know that he's leading by example just because of the way that he's been able to really elevate his game. But he really wants to add that vocal side to things. And I think you talk about this a lot when it comes to, team sports and especially football, is that for some people that is a really tough adjustment to make. Not everyone is kind of born to be that type of leader. And it seems like Olu isn't necessarily, fitting into that category. So I think it'll be really interesting to see how he kind of steps out of his shell. He seems really confident in talking to us. He said he's healthy and ready to go for spring, which is pretty big for this offensive line. especially when you talk about continuity on offense. I think that's one thing that I really remember from last spring was James Franklin talking about how Drew Scruggs and Olu Fashanu were the two guys who didn't miss any time last spring. And I think you could make the case that those were their two best offensive linemen for the whole season. So, I think that Olu is in a really interesting spot. There's going to be a lot of attention on him. At the same time, I think that he's one of these guys that's really equipped to handle that because he probably won't notice it if you believe him. So it's going to be a big year for him. You talk about all these guys that are going to the combine right now, and he very easily could be there. I did that mock draft roundup for Joey Porter Jr. earlier today, and you kind of think, you look at where the offensive linemen stack up in some of those, and Olu could easily be in the top 10, top 5, even top 3 of some of those. So he's someone that's going to have a lot of attention going into next year. I think he's ready for it, and I think he's built to handle it. So it's going to be, I think, fun to watch him over these next couple months and over this next year, to where this time next year, he's probably getting ready to go to Indianapolis too.
As you mentioned, Daniel, Olu is the first to admit this isn't necessarily a natural thing to him to be a guy who's going to be a commanding leader in a room of young men like this. But neither was it was the same deal for Drew Scruggs. I mean, he told us last year he didn't think he'd be equipped to be this kind of a guy, a team captain. And sometimes it's where your career takes you and where your production takes you, and ultimately it's a lot about where the other guys in the room. Who are they looking at in adverse moments? And sometimes you're just the guy who has those eyes on you. And that's when you start to realize time to take ownership. Not everybody shows up and says, I can't wait to step up to that spot. Sometimes you're just there, and all of a sudden, you have no other option, and you need to embrace it.
Can I add one more point on that, Tyler?
Absolutely.
Listen, it's one thing for Olu Fashanu, the one-game starter, to try to exert himself as a leader. Mm-hmm. It's another thing for Olu Fashanu, the projected top 10 NFL draft pick, to be a leader. Do you follow what I'm saying? When you're in that room, now you've got the bona fides. All right. Now everybody in that room knows what you did. They've seen what you did to put yourself in that position. Now, does everybody in that room have your talent? No, but you put in the work. And the one thing that we've heard about from James Franklin and from Troutwine and from everybody who we've talked to is Olu Fashanu. Part of it is natural talent and his physical build and all that stuff. The other is the work ethic and the seriousness with which he takes everything. So again, it's one thing when a guy who's played one game, if he tries to be the leader, that may not work. But when he's showing up on everybody's draft board and everybody in that room is looking at him, that's a whole different story. You don't have to be the most outspoken guy. You've done it through your actions. And if you develop as more of a vocal leader, great. But he's done it by example.
Speaking of the draft board, things have the chance to get pretty exciting come this time next year with the 2024 draft class. You can go down the list, use your imagination. There's a lot of guys on this Penn State roster 3 years in or beyond now that could tantalize NFL scouts next year. But one guy who's already kind of thrown his hat in the ring and feels like he's going to be warranting that attention next year is Gallen King. I don't blame him. I saw Pro Football Focus said if every single player in college football right now was available to be drafted, here's our first round mock. Joey Porter Jr. was not on it. Gallen King was on it. Guy who just led Power 5 football and pass breakups. Guy who I think is a very, very good open field tackler and someone who plucked his third interception of the season acrobatically against Utah in the Rose Bowl. Mark, you were there with Gallen King. He's a guy that doesn't raise his voice all that much, but you pay attention when he listens. And James Franklin's been talking about him since he showed up to campus in January of 2021.
Yeah, I asked him about Joey Porter Jr. or somebody did. I forget if it was me or somebody else, but he being the first Penn State defensive back to be taken in the first round, which is mind blowing. I mean, I still can't believe that hasn't happened yet. And it looks
defensive back, not just one or the other, defensive back.
Yeah, I mean, it's just absolutely crazy to think of all the great DBs they've had. Mark Robinson. I mean, Justin King was really good. I mean, for the players they've had, Michael Zordich, the younger, was a guy who played in the league for a long time. I mean, just for all the guys that they've had, for nobody ever doing. But anyway, asking Joey Porter or asking Gallen King, about Joey Porter Jr. and how much it means to him to see somebody getting that opportunity. He just matter-of-factly was like, yeah, it's good to see him going through it. And I'm paraphrasing. And, I'm going to be there next year. So, and I was like, whoa, that's a pretty bold statement. And he's like, well, that's the confidence that you have to have. And listen, I would say, I would put the question to you guys right now. My beloved Eagles, if they needed a cornerback and you had the choice between Joey Porter Jr. and Gallen King, who would you take? And I'm telling you, this is no offense to Joey Porter Jr. because he has all these measurables at the NFL level, but I think Gallen King is more of a surefire NFL, going to be legit in the NFL. And that's not to say that Joey Porter Jr. isn't. I just think he's been tested more. He's been more consistent. And if it were my team drafting, and this isn't going to happen because they're going to be in different drafts, but I think a lot of people would be on my side. I don't know if you guys would, but I think a lot of people would look at it that way.
I mean, I think given that we've only seen him for 2 years and when Joey's was on campus for 4 years, I have a hard time not going with Gallen King. If you're putting two on the table, ideally you can have both. And Manny Diaz did last year and it worked out pretty well for this defense. But I think with Porter, because of how special he is with those go-go gadget arms and his length and that radius, he has a chance to maybe neutralize some weapons in the NFL that a lot of defenses are going to struggle to contend with, maybe at that tight end position as well. He just has a chance to really create some matchup issues. The wide receivers are getting bigger, more athletic. So are the cornerbacks. He's a prime example. But if you're talking about trying to find the best 11 defenders to go out there and put together a game, Gallen King to me is a more complete defender. And we'll find out next year. Look, he's going to be the number one cornerback on everyone's board when they go through and they get ready. I think both of these guys are first-round talents. I think both of them are going to play a long time in the NFL. But I'm with you. I'd probably go Gallen King. And that says a lot because I think so very highly of Joey Porter Jr. But the more I consider the question, I think I do land there. Daniel,
Joey has the super high ceiling, like the super duper high ceiling. A guy who could somehow, with all of his with his physical, just the way he's built, could develop into something unbelievable. But I'm just saying, if you're investing that, I think the more surefire thing. So, I mean, both of them are great. And the good thing is once Joey Porter's out, I'm allowed to be out of Penn State. I'm allowed to be a Joey Porter fan. And I was a fan of his coming into Penn State just because of everything that he kind of stands for and what he's gone through with his family and all of those different things. So it's going to be fun, but it's one of those fun questions to kick around that if you were a GM, who would you take? So
Daniel, you covered the NFL for a couple of years. You've got a good lay of the land at the next level. What's your answer here?
I think if I had like the number 10 pick tomorrow, I would pick Joey Porter Jr. But if I was rolling out into the Big Ten title game against Ohio State in December, I might go with Gallen King. I think that when the season ended, I think Gallen King had a better season than Joey Porter Jr. I mean, I think about that Purdue game in week 1, and I came away from that game just gobsmacked with how good Gallen King was. Part of it was that they didn't even really try to test him, but when they did, he was up to it every time. I mean, I didn't really get, the 6 pass breakups and that fumble recovery I thought were, really great for Joey Porter. But, when I was at the airport the next day, I was mostly thinking about, what Gallen King did, how he looked. And I thought that, Gallen King really, looked the part of, a very high floor player. But I think when you're talking about, going into the NFL, I think that ceiling is what you want. Having a reliable or maybe close to a sure thing, that's nice. But I think when you have the opportunity to add someone with those physical tools that Joey Porter Jr. has for the NFL, I think you do it really. I think you can think twice about it, but I think you do ultimately end up, picking Porter. But I think that Gallen King is in for a really big year. I thought it was nice. I thought it was really nice for him that he ended up on, I believe it was the Walter Camp All-America team. He did get some national recognition. I think that going into next year, I think that his name is definitely going to be, on the radar. Joey Porter Jr.'s name was really out there because of what a pro prospect he was. I think that was really why he was such a, bigger name coming in. Also, his name is Joey Porter, which doesn't hurt in that respect. But I think that Gallen King has the chance to come into next year as a, very highly regarded player. And, I think for all intents and purposes. I mean, I think that he's really well positioned to deliver on that.
It would be quite the development if after the program history doesn't produce a single defensive back in the first round, if they do go back-to-back like Kalen King forecast. And tell you what, you start to get the lay of the land in that room right now with the upcoming safeties, the rising cornerbacks. You might see a streak developing for Terry Smith, Anthony Poindexter in the backfield there. They've got a lot of good things brewing, including the fact that, according to Kalen King, Storm Duck, second-team All-ACC player for North Carolina last year, has adjusted seamlessly, really fit in well. He was one of the performers of early workouts picked by Terry Smith, and a lot of nice things to say about him did Kalen King. Are we missing anything before we turn the page to basketball? It was a busy day there on Saturday. I know we're still kind of working our way through some of the coverage and content up at the site. Anything that we want to throw on the table before we move on?
Yeah, I would say that in sizing up the recent arrivals, the January arrivals, those offensive linemen, I think all kind of fit the bill. Sometimes guys come in and they're either really, light or really heavy. And, you look at Birchmeyer, Williams, and Donka, and these guys are all put together. They were all obviously in legit weight programs. I don't think the kind of program that they're in right now, but these guys all passed the eyeball test. And then I can't go by without mentioning Mega Barnwell.
Yes.
And if you just see the photo of him next to those offensive linemen, I mean, he's either going to be the biggest tight end in the history of tight ends, or he's going to develop into an O-lineman. I don't know what's going to happen, but he is a large human being. And who else let me see if there's somebody else who.
I think we can set up Daniel here, Davon Townley, because I think all three of us were like, whoa, Davon Townley is not the young man who showed up here a couple of years ago, who, by the way, I think he was about 220 pounds at enrollment, a basketball convert. Daniel, you wrote about him, so you can take this one.
Yeah, I think we have to give a hat tip to Drew Shelton for kind of kicking this off for us. Where 2 weeks ago when we had the freshman availability, Drew Shelton was asked who had given him trouble or who it was good to go up against in practice, and he said obviously everyone knows Denai Dennis Sutton, but then he mentioned Davon Townley as someone who gave him some fits. He said he had a really good bull rush. Good hands, was good off the edge. And so we were able to follow up, or Tyler was able to follow up with Devon Elise about, what it's like to have a player enter the transfer portal, come back, make that switch. It's a lot of things happening at once. And, by all accounts, Davon Townley is really taking to this well and, has the chance to be something in the middle, given what he has to do physically. I think we'll have to wait and see until probably August before we know whether or not that'll be in 2023 or beyond. But I think that is, I think that could turn into a really big transfer portal win for Penn State when we look back on this offseason.
Yeah, one other guy, Tamir Robinson. I mean,
Yes.
at linebacker. I mean, I think he played defensive end, or I don't know exactly where he was playing, but some people projected him as a defensive end. But he definitely passes the eyeball test. Penn State has him listed at 6'3", 230, and I would say he's at least 230. And it doesn't look it's good weight. So he's a guy, another one of those. And I'm sure we're missing people, but if we sat here and went through everybody, the show would take 6 hours. So.
And we have a website that's fully functional 24/7. In fact,
that's right.
Lions247. So check that out. We're always conversing on the message boards, and there's a lot to talk about. There will be a ton of new roster information to glean next week. We're expecting to get a peek at winter workouts as they conclude, at least some feedback from winter workouts, and then getting the spring ball. We're going to have a lot more opportunities to speak with players, get out there and see some stuff. So over at Lions247.com, always a good spot. Guys, I hate to shortchange basketball, but they're not quite fully back on the bubble, so I don't feel all that bad. But how close are they? I mean, Daniel, we got 5 minutes here. Start us off by saying a two-game win streak is a nice start. What does it really do to put a dent in their hopes?
Joe Lunardi has them back into the next 4 out. So they're in that 76 to my math is bad, but they're in that second range. I think that they are sort of back on the bubble. They just can't really afford to have any missteps. They've got 4 games left. They're playing an Ohio State team on Thursday night that's lost 13-14 and hasn't really looked competitive at times. But the computers and advanced stats still like Ohio State for now. But that's one that you really just can't afford to lose, because after that, you've got a Rutgers team that really took it to you in Piscataway about a month ago. You have to go to Northwestern to face the second place team in the Big Ten that has been, I guess, one of the more quieter surprises nationally. And then you finish up with a Maryland team that, we've seen what they are at home. With that upset over Purdue was really, really impressive. But they're a completely different team when they're away from Xfinity Center, like we saw at Nebraska. But I'll steer the conversation here. I think that these next 4 games, it's as Jalen Pickett goes, this team will go. I think that according to Penn State, he had a clean sweep of all the national honors after what he did last week. 41 against Illinois, 32 against Minnesota, 2 wins. That's someone who is playing his best basketball at the biggest moment this season.
Mark Brennan, a few years back, you were on this very podcast singing the praises of Lamar Stevens, and Penn State was trying to make their push toward NCAA tournament. Then the world came crashing down on all of this. But where is he in Jalen Pickett? It's an abbreviated Penn State career, but you've seen a lot of Penn State basketball. Where is he in that conversation now?
Yeah, he's playing as well as anybody I've ever seen. I mean, as well as anybody I've ever seen. Now, having said that, I don't quite go back to Jesse Arnell. I don't quite go back to the mid-50s. But, yeah, I mean, he's doing it at a level, and Daniel can attest to this. He's actually raised the level of his play in Big Ten against Big Ten competition, which is very, very difficult to do. And what is that telling you? That's telling you that when the opponents are more difficult and Penn State needs more from him, he's giving Penn State more. When they come off of a 4-game losing streak, their backs are against a proverbial wall. If they lose one, that if they lose to Illinois, their NCAA tournament hopes are done. They're faint now. They still have work to do. But they would not even be there. So what does he do? He comes up in the next 2 games and scores a total of over 70 and drags Penn State right back into it. But I think Micah Shrewsbury had a very good point earlier this week. And I said, what would your case be for Jalen Pickett being an All-American? And he went through all of the things that make Jalen Pickett so special. But then he said, it is now on the coaching staff and the other players. He's gotten them to this spot. It's on the coaching staff and the players to close this thing out strong, because for him to be an All-American, they are going to have a positive finish. That's just the way it is. I mean, people don't look at sub-500 teams in the Big Ten and think that guy's an All-American. So they got to make that push. Now, could he get there? Yes, he could get there. And I think the other good thing, circling back to the big picture outside of just Pickett, you look at the 4 games they have remaining at Ohio State, Rutgers at Northwestern, and then Maryland at home. As of now, or as of last night, those all qualified as net quad 1 wins. So you still have quality opponents. Even though Ohio State's stinking it up, they're still sitting there at 64 in Jerry Palm. I didn't see what they are in the net, but I think it's right in that same area. You have quality wins available. So you win 3 of those, and I think you give yourself a chance. You win 2. The issue is going to be if you only win 2, you're probably going to be in the first round games in Chicago. And if you end up matched up with, say, a Minnesota, that could be just a strength of schedule killer. So there's a lot on the line. But long story short, I think if they win 3 of these last 4, they're going to be in a really good spot with winning 1 or 2 at Big Tens to kind of fight their way into that tournament.
Whatever happens here in the next 4 games, these guys will have you covered over at Lions247.com. Mark Brennan, Daniel Gallen, both will have their predictions up for this upcoming Ohio State matchup up on the site here before that one tips off. Fellas, always appreciate the hoops perspective. Always love talking football with you here on the podcast. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Tyler.
See ya.
All right. See ya. Mark Brennan, Daniel Gallen over at Lions247.com. Nick Tarburton back home in Bucks County getting ready for the NFL draft. Thanks to all of them for joining me, Tyler Donahue, on this latest episode of the Lions247 Podcast. We're back with another episode later this week. In the meantime, wishing you all well.